As I had indicated over the email as well, this is a group discussion or a panel discussion that we are having, essentially to allay certain fears within the industry in general and Airbus in particular in terms of how to go about interacting with the industry. Of course, this is not a new problem because industry and academia have existed for almost ever, and they are two very important pillars of the society, and it's important that they interact in healthy ways so that the society benefits out of it. But our focus primarily is on the aerospace industry and also even more particularly Airbus. Airbus in India has grown quite a bit in the recent times. They have about 1,200 engineers working at the India Engineering Center, which is also like the headquarters for South Asia. And they have been doing more cutting edge work now compared to what they have been doing in the past. We have been interacting with Airbus on many different fronts for almost 8-9 years now. It has been a very beneficial relationship in a mutual sense. We wanted to see if we can extend that across institutions in India, all institutions. But to start with, I think IISc and the IITs, in terms of the benefit, percolates down not only to the faculty but also the students in terms of the internships that they get, kind of competitions that they participate in, and also eventually jobs. Any exposure to the aerospace ecosystem, not only to Airbus but also their tier 1, tier 2 partners in specific areas that we all do research on, hugely benefits the students. So keeping all this in mind, we thought it will be really nice if Airbus interacts in a better way, more stronger way in the kind of ways that we have been doing, but also many more possibilities with all of you and with other colleagues that might be interested later on. As you know, we have now 23 IITs and including IISc, it's 24, a couple of dozen. Not, of course, all of them have aerospace engineering streams, but as you know, the aerospace industry interacts with people from many other departments, not only aerospace. So that's the reason why I thought we could try and involve as many as possible. It's possible that already many of these institutions are engaging with Airbus in some way or the other. For example, I know at least 2 or 3 IITs already have an MOU with Airbus as well, just like IISc. And we want to see if this can be expanded even further. MOUs are of not much use unless you actually utilize them in ways that benefit both of us. We also want to learn from a few past experiences that we have had and also find the way forward. It will probably take too long if I start talking about my experiences. Maybe we can do that on an informal basis, some other context. Right now, this particular presentation is essentially geared towards the Airbus engineers, both seniors as well as the recent joinees, many of whom are kind of not aware of the possibilities when they interact with the academia, the kind of problems that they are struggling with, how they can probably accelerate finding solutions towards it, and how the academia could also benefit from that in terms of many collaterals. These are the 5 questions that I had, pointed questions, because we are kind of time constrained on this meeting to have it as short as possible. I will throw it open as and when I go into these slides. So I'll start with the first question that I had asked you all. How keen are we to help solve the challenges in the aerospace industry? Because there are many different challenges. Some examples of them are in the sustainability realm, MBSE and AIML applications, by what is called as industrializing our research. Because many of us, though we do industry applicable research, a lot of times we do more futuristic research as well, which is probably not of immediate relevance to the industry. And that's the right way to be, because each of us have our own prerogatives and we can't take on their responsibilities or they can't take on our responsibilities. But there's a huge overlap. It's there that we want to see how both of us, academia and industry, can benefit from each other. From your point of view, I'd just like any of you to volunteer and try and answer this particular question.
So I can go ahead and tell actually the thing what you correctly mentioned, that with industry probably the futuristic research probably is not that sometimes is not these are mainly for because of the 2 reasons. One is that the time generally industry wants to engage for a particular research generally it is a little shorter duration. So my experience is that should work on a sometimes what happens they already have a existing open problem, and that open problem they need some special skill to solve that thing. So they give it as a more of a project mode. The funding is for 2 or maximum 3 years, but you generally do not hire a PhD student and hire a master student. That is number one. And the number 2 is that sometimes another experience I had where I degree student associated with it, but that was a startup company. If there is a technology development thing angle is coming, then the patent sharing becomes an issue. Sometimes what happens, the industry does not want to share the IP, they still want to hold it on. And that is one of the significant difference between getting a funding from the government organization and getting a funding from the institute. Because right now, I think the university, Indian academia also has now a leapfrog where they started understanding the research also is more of a source of generating revenue, right? So it's not only that the publication is the ultimate gratification we want. So getting some kind of model which will be win-win, where even if it is technology development, there should be a certain win-win situation the industry or Airbus should come up with. Maybe if there is as I told, that there is an existing problem they probably have there, they want a solution that is already, there are lots of patent associated with it and they have it's a kind of core technology Airbus has. There might be some other newer technology they probably would like to do research on and develop through it, and where there might be a degree associated. Yeah, I think those are the two, and the usual route of consultancy model is always there, where you pay for the hourly involvement of the faculty, where you some kind of small projects like 1.5 year or something. And I would like to also mention about the AI/ML application. I think AI/ML application has a huge scope, and particularly most of our background is mechanical science. So I think the mechanics inspired or the mechanical science guided AI/ML. It's not only the usual the textual data or the NLP kind of stuff which we probably are interested in. But here there is a huge scope. There is a huge field now coming up with physics guided, physics involved, or physics informed. And also there are certain concepts like operator learning and those things are known, which basically deals with mapping from continuous space to continuous space, and which generally we do in mechanical science. I think AI/ML also has a huge application, and also one of the last things that yesterday I met a person who works in air transportation, traffic management. As we are going into the drone age sooner or later, the traffic, there will be a lot of applications of the traffic management in the airspace. It's not only Airbus specific I'm talking about, but aerospace as an industry, if you want to think of, that is going to be a significant challenge for our highly populated country, where air traffic management needs to be solved by us. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Shrutikanta. I think that was quite a comprehensive answer, which covered not only this question, but also a few other questions as well. But I think the inputs will be very useful for Airbus. So what I'll instead do now is probably very briefly go through the other 4 questions as well, and then we'll throw it open to everybody to contribute on whichever questions they are interested in. Second question that we had was in terms of our own experiences with previous industry collaborations, which avenues, in other words, means are there which are most effective or preferred or impactful in your own experiences. For example, it could be exchange of human resources, like we could have a candidate from the industry come to us to do ERP, and many of you have guided ERP students in the past. It could also be more senior people from the industry coming in as professors of practice, which is really catching up these days. That's another way an exchange could happen. Now, we as faculty members many times go to universities abroad, but how about sabbaticals within the industry, either abroad or in India? How helpful would that be, or has it been in the past, if any of you have had such experiences? Apart from human exchange, we can look at project-specific collaborations, which Sritikanto just touched upon in terms of certain cutting-edge research areas where we can contribute. For example, he talked of AI/ML. Instead of applying it just for the heck of it in terms of terminology, identifying the right kind of problems where it really helps the industry leapfrog in certain areas. Project-specific collaborations like that in any area, of course. He also touched upon consultancy, which is more like already a known body of knowledge that we have acquired or accumulated over a period of time, and we want to just utilize that to solve a particular problem that the industry is facing, where they may not have access to that specific knowledge. In terms of this, I would like to know what your experience has been, but as I said, I'll go through the other questions as well, and then we'll go one by one to each individual so that you can tell about things that you have experience with and how we can do it better in the future. Third question is in terms of our perception, in terms of collaborating with the industry. Already Shritikanta mentioned about IP issues that could be a challenge, so there could be similarly other challenges as well, which we academicians might have found in the past trying to have a collaboration with the industry, the aerospace industry in particular, which is a little more closed compared to a few other industries. How do we tackle these? And if you have tackled it in the past, which I'm sure many of you would have in successful collaborations, is there something that we can adapt going forward with Airbus as well? The fourth question that we have is in terms of addressing certain practical challenges which you might have done in the past while collaborating with the aerospace industry, not necessarily Airbus, but any other company in India and or abroad. So if you can share very briefly what was the problem that you tackled, how practical it was, because that is kind of a key word for the industry. Sometimes the perception from their side is that we work on ivory tower kind of problems, which is of course our freedom. That's something obviously we will do. But the question is, are we also doing certain things which are of relevance, if not immediately, at least in the immediate future? I think that is what they would like to listen to in terms of certain past activities that we have had. And the final thing is in terms of the future, what you recommend in order to facilitate an even greater knowledge exchange from the kind of modalities that I already discussed to probably newer avenues that you might be aware of, or at least you have an idea of, which you have kind of imagined for the future and which probably can help us leapfrog on this. Sometimes a late start helps us in terms of utilizing the more novel modalities of going forward. Shritikanta has already given his input. Maybe we'll start with Pratikash.
I think these are all some very well posed questions to really ponder about how an interaction with the industry and academia should go about, and especially as we have been highlighting that aerospace industry is more closed as compared to any other industries. One of the things about the manpower resource that I feel, and I think you've also highlighted that, is in addition to having people like professors of practice who come into the academia from the industry, I think one more good practice would be the ability of one of the faculty faculty members from academics to go into industry and have detailed understanding of the industrial issues, because not all kinds of problems will be shared when we just do a very brief collaborative research with the industry. And especially going into the aerospace industry, I think we'll have a very good understanding of how the aerospace domain is working on various issues, not just what your expertise might be, but on various issues. I think that is one very important thing that we should be looking at. And if you are planning to have a long-term collaboration with Airbus, this could be one of the modalities that we should explore, and how effectively we can exchange information and how effectively manpower could be shared. Because one way is to train students in the academia scenario who can go and participate in the industrial environments, and the other way is to ourselves as faculties, we should also get some exposure, which might be very much fruitful in the future, looking at how future is moving forward. Yeah, that's about my view. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your inputs, Ritika, giving a new dimension to the potential collaborations that we can have. Irfan?
Dinesh, thanks for making this nice presentation and raising these questions. So basically, in addition to IP issue that was raised here, when you collaborate with industry, so one additional step get into process is when you want to publish, you may need again extra legal procedure to get approval. I think it's a common among industry. So if this can be streamlined or speed up, that's one minor additional step. It's not inconvenience, but it's just additional step I can see. To begin with, maybe we can share who are faculty interested in collaborating with Airbus, their profile, although they can find, we can make a kind of executive summary of the profile and the areas in which people are working. And then at the same time, perhaps from Airbus side as well, they can share the broad areas in which they are interested in. This can be seen by each other, and this could be a starting point to initiate initial collaboration, maybe perhaps small steps, small projects, consultancy, that eventually can grow further. And that's my opinion. Thank you, Dinesh.
Thank you so much, Irfan. Yeah, I think that's an important point that you brought up, potential for publications. But there are also very well established practices in terms of non-dimensionalizing data, agreeing upon what can be published and what cannot be published a priori before we start the collaboration. There are certain cases where we have done this in a very successful manner. We could probably share some of that information as well going forward in the future. The other suggestions that you made are also very critical, so we'll see how we can take that forward, because as you said, it's important to be very specific about certain areas in which we want to collaborate, and then we can find the right people in both the academia and industry to get talking rather than in generic terms like this. But we wanted to get it started in some fashion, so this is a more generic attempt, but eventually that will be the goal in identifying the right kind of people. And sometimes it's difficult because companies like Airbus are like an ocean. You don't know really whom to contact. When individuals try to explore possibilities, by the time the project starts, it takes few months, if not years. Jokingly, Airbus says even for them to find who is the right person to contact within Airbus, it takes months. So naturally, it would force anybody external. But nonetheless, there is an intent from both sides, from our end as well as their end, in terms of actually making this work. And I think that itself will also put in place certain modalities. Probably they could have a team which kind of identifies people whom each of us can work with based on our own research interests. Okay, thank you, Irfan. Next, let's go to Guru.
Hello. So we know on a day-to-day basis, number of Airbus aircraft actually fly thousands and thousands of passengers successfully, more often than not without any issues. So the natural question to ask is, why would they want to collaborate with us? On a day-to-day basis, again, they may have number of challenges, but I believe to address these challenges, their engineers are better equipped than probably us. So again, the question to ask is, why would they want to collaborate with us? And what is it that we can bring to the table that their own engineers, experts who have been in the field for a number of years can't really provide them? So this then makes us think about where we can actually contribute and where they can actually exploit what we have to offer for them. If I'm not wrong, most industries have vision documents where they will have short-term targets and long-term targets. Like Shitikanto, Pratikash, Irfan already mentioned, trying to address some of these short-term targets of the industry with the kind of manpower that we get, who are more often than not are not completely trained. In fact, it's our job to train them, may not be the most feasible way of engaging with these industries. When I say short term, typically I would say 18 months or lesser. And at least from an academic point of view, I would say 3 years or more is what slightly I would say as long term engagements that we can be part of. Now, we also know that if we have to contribute something, and if this is something that has to be assimilated by the industry, to actually see this in reality, there is a big time lag because they have to eventually overcome the regulations and all the certifications. So I believe personally that it is better for us to engage in activities that Airbus itself looks at being part of, let's say 15 to 20 years from now on, so that we can spend this time more fruitfully, whereas their own engineers can actually do what they are best equipped to do, which is the regular day-to-day activities of Airbus. And this allows us time periods which are 3 years or longer to be associated with Airbus and actually see through not just research, but eventually these research translating into some useful technological products. So I believe to a large extent, one possible way which I see definitely where we can contribute is through collaborative projects. And to give an example, there are sufficient avenues where academia from India and entities like Airbus can be part of. A simple example that I can think of is typically the Office of Naval Research challenges that keeps coming up every once in 2 or 3 years is something which openly demands collaboration between such entities, where even Indian universities can be part of, along with known organizations like Airbus. And there are a number of examples within Indian context where successful ONR projects eventually have been approved. And Airbus can harness opportunities like this to actually obtain funding as well, and also engage with industry to look at some of their long-term technological challenges that they would like to address. So this, I believe, addresses the second part of your question. The third question is in terms of the manpower and how we can engage with them. So partly, like I already addressed, personally, I believe long-term engagements are what I see fruitful rather than addressing certain very specific problems that may have, because I do not personally at least think I am well equipped to handle any of those. And I don't know, despite interaction with them, while we can probably provide them with engineering solutions, but whether in the shorter duration of time our manpower will be able to turn around and deliver that. So that is a very tricky thing. Now, to give you an example of where this has been successfully looked at, so without getting into the details for regulatory issues, I can think of one instance at least where academia, and in this case I'm not just referring to IIT Bombay, but a consortium of institutes including IISc, IIT Bombay, IIT Madras, where they have been engaged with Indian defense organizations in the recent past, where they are looking at technologies beyond 10 years and they have jointly been able to come up with IPs. This allows now the appropriate organizations to think of these technological ideas that have been generated to either incorporate as part of their top-down design approach or as a possible retrofit to their existing aircraft. Now that is entirely up to them because we do not necessarily have a say in that. So now Airbus can also essentially harness something like this where they engage with us, where we come up with appropriate solutions, and eventually Airbus can see how this can be eventually used in their design for future applications. These are some of the modes in which we can interact with them. Can you just recollect to me the last fifth question?
It's in terms of the future recommendation, what we think would be better practices, which probably has not yet been covered in what I presented in terms of other ways in which we can engage, essentially make the engagement more fruitful for both.
Okay. One way for Airbus to actually check how effectively to engage with us would be on a regular basis to sponsor some students, or let us say some engineers from Airbus to our institutes as sponsored masters or PhD students, where they focus on very specific problems that Airbus might be interested in. Now, this is the simplest way how one can engage with Airbus, and Airbus can actually see how we engage with them, what kind of solutions that we provide to them. This, apart from the regular registration fee and other expenses, doesn't necessarily involve a lot of funding, but based on the outcomes and if more serious work requires to be done at our end in the institute, then funding can be generated, and then separately a project can be handled with engineer Airbus has sponsored being one of the primary managers overlooking it along with the individual university group. So this is a way practically how I believe it can be approached. Other than, like I said, the example with ONR or other entities where jointly collaborations can be taken up and proposals can be submitted. And if I'm not wrong, just 2 weeks back, there were 2 scientists from US Air Force who visited. I know certainly they visited IIT Delhi, they visited IIT Bombay. I believe they must have visited IISc as well as other IITs, where they are saying that now it's possible for universities from India by themselves or along with collaborators to go for funding opportunities with US Air Force. So these are some of the avenues that one can get.
Thank you very much, Guru. Very comprehensive response. I think only a guru can give that. So Also, I think in terms of some of the very specific things that you pointed out in terms of what areas we could collaborate on, because companies like Airbus, who have been pioneers or leaders in their specific industry, typically have, as you mentioned, a long-term vision, and the vision documents are definitely there. So there are different categories of problems. There are current problems, which mostly, as you said, their own employees are in the best position to solve them, and they are doing that, obviously. So where they really would like to engage with us is in mutually beneficial areas, which means that it has to be neither that something that is achievable currently or too much into the future, but somewhere in between. Many of the modalities you mentioned, especially in terms of engaging with other organizations like ONR or US Air Force, similarly DST also has a lot of projects where they encourage, if we have already an industrial partner who's interested, then we can jointly apply for research proposals. Many possibilities are there. Thanks a lot for those inputs. Next, I come to my alma mater, IIT Madras, Professor Velmurugan. We had a round of introduction in the beginning, so we couldn't introduce you to everybody else. Maybe you can start introducing yourself and then try to address some of these questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I think I know everybody almost. So I don't have personal interaction with everybody, but most of them I know, at least by name. So thank you very much, Professor Dinesh, for making this opportunity. What I feel is almost everybody has done, every point has been covered by individuals, but I can put it in my own words. What I can say is, yeah, it's a win-win situation. So what we are good at is basically educating them. So you have students from the the industries. They come here either for some short-term training programs, 1 or 2 weeks, or for a degree program, and then train them, or even for PhD. That is a very ideal option. We can have we'll have long-term interactions. It will be useful for us in the long term. And also, it can come with some projects, so that we are also committed, and the student, when he comes there, he also knows that this is to be solved, and that is going to be part of his PhD program. It will be a very successful program. That is that is my own experience. We have one with Mercedes-Benz. The student came here, and also he came to the project. Was done in time, very successful. Also, we had programs with other industries like Tata's and Reliance, but again they are for futuristic technologies. So there we have some issues like we are not able to publish papers, and they also demand. So I think if the project comes with some students, or some employees from their organizations, it will be very useful. But from that, we can also have the visits, if we are able to visit at least for some months, in the industries, we have a lot of exposure to the problems. Also, we'll have one-to-one connections that will give us a good understanding between the institutions and the industries. The other option, what you said, the professor of practice, normally it is done only for those who are at the back end of their service. So if we have some exchange programs, even in middle level or initial level, they come here and also they have some exposure to academics. That also will be beneficial, because they come up with something which they are working. They can also teach to our students. That will have online understanding of the problems. Live problems will be very interesting to the students. So these are some of the points which I can think of. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Murugan. The specifics that you mentioned about the project with Mercedes-Benz, Tata's, Reliance, etc. You mentioned about issues with publishing papers, but what about IP? Was there no issue, or if at all anything was generated in any of those cases? If it was, and how it was resolved?
Yeah, basically, IPs, they are not very open. Though they say that they write in web papers, but still they are little hesitant to go for this. What I can say is, at least when you are in Indian industries, they are still there. It's a long way to go. That is what I feel. They are not very open. I think probably it will mature in due course of time.
Thank you very much for your suggestions also, which was kind of unique. Maybe Guru, you want to add to that answer? Yeah.
This is regarding a point that Professor Velmurugan made. It's a very nice point. Very recently, we have an example of a faculty from our department who was supposed to go to L&T for a sabbatical. So L&T is our neighbor at IIT Bombay. And after a lot of paperwork, the sabbatical was approved from IIT Bombay. But eventually, because of IP issue, his sabbatical didn't actually go through. He was supposed to spend time at L&T during the sabbatical and work for specific problem related to one of L&T's products. But because of difference in what IIT Bombay believed and what L&T believed how the IP should be shared, the actual appointment itself didn't go through. This can be an issue. This has been to a large extent nowadays resolved when we have to deal with Indian defense organizations. It's quite seamless, but I believe there are still issues when it comes to dealing with private companies. It is better to actually make the appropriate staff from both the organizations resolve this before we actually come in.
Thank you so much. Siti and Irfan, would you like to add anything anything before we conclude this call?
Most of the points are already covered, so I don't have anything specific to add.
Thank you so much, Shruti.
So just one point, I think Guru mentioned, because I initially started with this thing, why Airbus would like to collaborate with us. That clarity should be brought in. I believe that most of the industries with whom actually we got engaged, either there are two sides. One is that there is an existing problem, they need some skill sets to solve that problem, and they don't have the expertise then and there only. So that's why they come in. Sometimes they need a special training of their employee. They send as a master student to our institute. We teach them for some specific courses. They get the skill and then they go back. Or sometimes actually they want to give it as a consultancy mode. We solve these things. Nowhere the IB comes in majority of the cases. But I have experience of working with healthcare industry, which is not like a long gestation technology, which will close the technology, which probably after 4 years can be deployed. And they are very hesitant to. They can say that we can give you a lump sum money, but that royalty and those things will be with us. And after you develop the technology, the IP is generated, we will be the sole owner of that IP. You will not have any stakes on this. And the second part, which I probably think what Guru pointed out, is that as a consortium, as a collective expertise, faculties should be treated like if we also start doing the same thing which an employee can do in an industry, then what is the point of coming to an academia? I think let's try to think of that. There might be something futuristic vision like EV-based technology, some kind of other areas which probably Airbus has thought of, but they have a parallel team probably working on that. Okay? So maybe there probably we can come in where probably we have a lot of time to discuss that. Okay, what if this technology comes in? And I think that will be also will be a perpetual kind of. As a matter of fact, like we have successfully initiated this kind of collaboration with DRDO now. So DRDO actually what they did actually, they came to us. We have a center, a JITC, Joint Advanced Research Center in IIT Delhi, where they initially gave us a project of 1.5 years just to tell that this idea is feasible or not. Give us some proof. And once this feasibility period is over, then they went ahead with a huge amount of funding, telling that now let's do it for next 4 years or 5 years, and we will perpetual. I think that kind of model also can be thought of. So let us throw ideas, crazy ideas, which they think that it might be industrially relevant after 10 years or 15 years, which can initially we can take it up as a feasibility, that just to give some proof that whether our skill sets, some of the skill sets can be agglomerated, or some of the skill sets we can build it on that, and then we can probably go ahead with a larger long-term project. But again, the question should be asked that why Airbus would be interested in getting involved.
Thanks, Shruti, for your final remarks. So I have been in touch with Airbus for a while. To some extent, I'm aware of why they are trying to get in touch with the academics. You mentioned many reasons for it, and almost all of them are applicable here for various problems. The idea is that they see their competitors also engaging with academia in a big way and how they have benefited from that. And they also see that some of the futuristic problems, as Guru mentioned, they are already having a certain group within themselves called the Emerging Technologies Center, where they are actually looking at a lot of futuristic problems like what we in academia do. But still, I think engagement with the academia will probably be a win-win situation in those areas where there's a lot of openness in terms of the kind of solutions we want to explore, and we are also willing to take high risks, and if things don't work, that's fine. They understand and appreciate what our roles are and what their roles are, and it's only in those overlapping areas that they really want to collaborate. They see that they have not taken that benefit which many other companies have, both in the aerospace industry as well as other industries. In spite of being here for so long, they have a checkered history in India. Especially in the recent past, there's been a huge engagement with India in many different fronts. Right now, they have 1,200 employees, but they're thinking of increasing it to 3,000 very soon. So they're growing really big, and most of these engineers earlier used to work on typical kind of consultancies, which were where the goals and objectives, even the procedures, were defined by their European counterparts. But now there are experts here who are working on cutting edge problems and also offering designs and new kinds of solutions and things like that. So I think it's a right opportune time for us to engage with them as well as for them to engage with us. But as you said, care will be taken to identify the right kind of problems where it's not team consultancy or whatever. There might be some faculty members in some of the other institutions, non-IIT institutions, who might be interested in taking those up as well. But I think being in the cream de la cream like the IISc or IITs, I think our expertise will be best utilized if we work on problems which are more futuristic in nature and where there's high risk, but also we can utilize or leverage what the industry can offer, because they are looking at the practical aspects of it as well. They are trying to see how quickly we can move a futuristic problem to getting solutions much closer in time. So because they for them, time is much more important than money. Taking things quicker to the market, for example, means that they want some of these technologies to work faster for them than it works for any of their rivals. So I think it's in those areas we can probably collaborate. One way forward is for us to put together a list of things that we would probably like to work on with them, and similarly expect a list to come from them in terms of what problems they would like to work on. We will see kind of a match, and then we can put the right people together so that they can take it forward from there. With that, we'll conclude this meeting. Thank you so much for all of your time and effort towards this, because it's a weekend and also a very short call. I just asked for it in the morning, and I'm so happy you could all make it on a Sunday evening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.